Welcome to day 172 of our 2020 Focus Bible reading. We are on Acts chapter 23, and these three chapters are covering when Paul returns to Jerusalem after his missionary journeys, that he is then, beat up by a crowd, put before the Roman authorities grab him up. Then he gives a speech to the crowd. They don't like it. The Romans are not sure what to do. They're going to flog him. He says, whoa, you're going to flog a Roman citizen? Oh, now we got a problem. So the Romans are now trying to say, all right, we got to figure out what's going on. So they called in the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leaders of the city and really of the nation, and called them in and said, all right, you got to tell us what's going on here. And so now Paul is in front of them. And so in chapter 23, verse 1, this is what we read. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin and said, "My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day." At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck." Those who were standing near Paul said, "How dare you insult God's high priest?" Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, 'Do not speak evil about the ruler of your people.'" Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and others Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee, descended from Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees believe all these things. There was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law who were Pharisees stood up and argued vigorously. "We find nothing wrong with this man," they said. "What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him?" The dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. The following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." The next morning some Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here." But when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner sent for me and asked me to bring you this man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "Some Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them are waiting in ambush for him. They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent for their request." The commander dismissed the young man with this warning: "Don't tell anyone that you have reported this to me." Then he called two of his centurions and ordered them, "Get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide horses for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix." He wrote a letter as follows: "Claudius Lysias, to His Excellency, Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews, and they were about to kill him, but I came with my troops and rescued him, for I have learned that he is a Roman citizen. I wanted to know why they were accusing him, so I brought him to their Sanhedrin. I found that their accusation had to do with questions about their law, but there was no charge against him that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried out against this man, I sent him to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him." So the soldiers, carrying out their orders, took Paul with them during the night and brought him as far as Antipatris. The next day, they let the cavalry go on with him while they returned to the barracks. When the cavalry arrived in Caesarea, there they delivered the letter to the governor and handed Paul over to him. The governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Learning that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear your case when your accusers get here." Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. All right, so there's a little bit more of a backstory going on here, but there are a couple important things to highlight that I found really, really fascinating. Okay, so Paul speaks out against the high priest, doesn't realize it's the high priest, realizes, okay, I shouldn't have done that. They continue to kind of press the case, and I love what he does here. Is the Apostle Paul then drops kind of a bomb in the room by saying, I'm one of the Pharisees, and I'm being punished because of the resurrection of the dead, which again goes back to why we call the Sadducees sad. Because they don't believe in the resurrection. They also don't believe in angels or spirits, but the Pharisees do. It's one of those. It's actually a political. It's a political tactic. Very often we see it at play even in our politics. Is once a group is united, if you can get them divided against each other, you're going to have an opportunity to kind of have your way. You see this played out all over human history. The Apostle Paul uses this in an argument because he realizes he's not getting anywhere, and that he's just going to show their ignorance and show their kind of the ridiculousness of the moment by simply pointing out something they disagree on, and then they disagree in front of the commander. It gets so bad, commander pulls Paul back, says, "All right, we're not gonna leave him in the middle of this." I love in verse 11 that the following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, "Take courage, as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." So now Paul has his marching orders. He's to go to Rome to make a testimony. The Apostle Paul knows this, and he made a testimony in Jerusalem, was beaten up for it and arrested for it. And that's why Jesus doesn't come along and just give him orders. He says, take courage. You got to take courage. It's not just something that grows up within you. You got to take it. And Jesus said, hey, take courage. Hang in there. Be strong, because you have to testify in Rome just as you testified in Jerusalem. And there's no promise of that's going to go well. It didn't go well in Jerusalem, but that was the mission that Jesus gave him. And notice it's Jesus himself who gives it, not a messenger, not a prophet, not somebody else. Jesus comes and assures Paul of this directly. I think that's such an important thing to understand about the relationship that Jesus had with the Apostle Paul. And then, the idea that there's a conspiracy to kill Paul, that Paul finds out through his sister's, basically his nephew, comes and tells him that, he has access to Paul, which is, this is one of the things that we fail to think about, when it comes to the prisons of today and the prisons in the ancient world were not a place of punishment. Prisons were a place of holding before trial, or holding before execution. Those were the only reasons somebody was in prison. And when you were in prison, you had to get your own food. You had to have your own, resource. So they didn't feed you. They didn't help you. That was for the community to do. And obviously, this guy had access to Paul to warn him, hey, this is what's coming. Paul says, go tell the commander. And so they end up sending Paul off to safety, to go before Felix, the governor, and Felix finds out, hey, okay, you're within my jurisdiction, so I'll take up the case. Now, granted, there were other people. Cilicia was pretty far away, but the trouble was here, so he was like, all right, under my authority, I'm gonna find out what's going on. And so that's where we end today's reading. We will see you tomorrow for chapter 24. Have a good one.